right, now we're moving into our final period of music history, at least until we move along somewhere else, and somebody else will have to add it on because I won't be here to tell you about it. So we're now into the modern period. If you remember from our little quick overview at the beginning of this series, we said that we don't really have a name for the modern period yet. We haven't got a classical, Baroque, romantic kind of title. And that's because we're still in the period. So we're talking about a time that starts around the turn of the century, the 1900s, or around the beginning of the wars that sort of permeate the 20th century. Although, as we've seen, there's certainly been plenty of war in all periods up until this point. So the modern period in history, as we've said, we've got World War I, we've got World War II, we've got the Korean War, we've got the Vietnam War, and every other little war that you can think of that's still going on around the world. So people still aren't really satisfied with their lives in many cases, and we see that changing practically every day. If you look at the map, it changes all the time. Countries change their names. They overthrow the colonial rulers that may still be in place from way back in the 1800s. So countries are changing. The map changes. I don't know how map makers, there's a tough word to say, map makers, how they even keep up with the changes in the political geography. Just think about Russia. At the beginning of the time period, it is still ruled by the Tsars and is one gigantic place. And then we have the Russian Revolution in 1917. And then after that, it becomes the Soviet Union. And we still have a gigantic place, but a completely different political structure that doesn't work out very well, as it turns out. And in 1991, that all falls apart. And now we're back to a whole lot of little countries, each with their own rulers. So just keeping track of that part of the map is a big job just in the 20th century. This is also a time period where the Middle East becomes an important player. Why is that? Mostly because there's oil all over the place. And as we know, oil is a very important commodity in the 20th century. So the Middle East is more of a power player now than it's ever been. But it also is a place where there's a lot of conflict. We have people with religions who don't like each other. We have cultures that just don't like each other. So we have a part of the world that's important for everybody in the world, but that has its own internal conflicts. Religious conflict has never gone away. We've seen it throughout history. We've had the Inquisition and all sorts of horrible things happening in the name of religion. So none of that's really new. It's just that we know a lot more about it now than we would have done 200 years ago. We get our news instantly. We know who's done what today. And we know who's done what in the last 3 minutes if you're one of those people who sits with your computer on the news thing all the time. So that's really important. Think about some of the things that happened in terms of human rights in the 20th century. Even just in America, we had desegregation in the 60s. We have women's rights, women getting the right to vote, minorities getting the right to vote. We had the whole prohibition movement in the early part of the century where nobody could get alcohol legally. Now we're talking about whether you can get marijuana legally. So lots of things there that have to do with what humans can and cannot do with their own lives. We also have a lot of significant technological things. Obviously, I can't go into all of them. If we did that, we'd be here all day just talking about all the great things that have been invented in the 20th century. But some of the ones that have a lot of significance would be the development of nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Now, that was what finally brought about the end of World War II, is that we just made that decision to, frankly, kill a lot of people, but it seemed to be the right thing to have done at the time. Now we have to deal with the aftermath of that, so we're always sort of thinking about who's got that now. But on the positive side of that, we also got nuclear energy out of that and using it in a positive kind of way. So even though we have some technology that's been used in a lot of bad ways, we've also used it for good things. Space travel, we don't think about that much these days because it's sort of commonplace. But if you were around in the mid part of the century, that was big news. When they went to the moon the first time, I was in junior high, so you can place my age there. I was in junior high, and I lived on Guam at the time because my dad was in the Air Force. And so they actually, landed out there where we were, and they went out there and picked them up out of the ocean from where I was. That was big news. People were glued to their television sets to watch people land on the moon. And even into like the 80s, when the shuttle would take off, everybody would have their TVs on. We would watch the shuttles go off. Today, that's just commonplace. Nobody really thinks much about that. Maybe if they take a trip to Mars, they take people to Mars, then people will sit up and take note about that again. The internet, obviously major player in the 20th century and into the 21st century. It has brought us closer together, whether that's good or bad. It's brought us closer together. We have much more access to information, and even if the information is not accurate, you have access to it. So it's another one of those things has like a two-edged sword to it. Yes, it's brought us all this information, but now we have to be smart and know which information is valid and what information is just garbage. Anybody who wants to can throw anything they want out there. And it can be true, not true, opinion, fact, and it's up to us to make those decisions. So we have a lot of things at our disposal, but we also have to be very smart about how we use those things. So it kind of puts the pressure on the individual in the modern period, and that's not necessarily been the case probably up until this time period. So let's talk about the arts now in the modern period. There's so many things happening in the world. I said we couldn't talk about all the technology that happens in the 20th century. You can't even talk about all the different kinds of art that happens in the 20th century. We've already seen the period of time right at the very beginning of the century that I always talk about as the period of the isms, where we have Impressionism and Expressionism and all those things that end with an ism. But there's a ton of those isms out there. Cubism, that's one that most people at least have heard of. We'll look at a Cubist piece here. The painter that most people think of when they think Cubism is Picasso, but Georges Braque, who was a colleague of his, was also a Cubist painter. So what did they do? They would take shapes you would recognize and cut them into cubical kinds of things, little pieces, and then sort of reassemble them. So it's sort of like taking a jigsaw puzzle, taking it apart and putting the pieces back in the wrong place. So the painting that we're looking at is called Violin and Candlestick. So if we look at it, we can see, okay, there's some sort of curved shape, so that must be the body of a violin. That's something we recognize. There's a little something that looks like it might be a piece of metal, so maybe that's a piece of a candlestick. But, if you just had that painting there and you didn't have a title, I would look at it and I think, maybe that's a guitar, because the shape is pretty much the same. So at least the artists who did Cubist paintings were generally helpful and told us what they were painting, because a lot of the time you couldn't tell. Some of the paintings, especially where they start taking people apart, their body parts everywhere, and then the painting tells you that it's a woman lying on a couch. Okay, I'll figure that out of that. One of the most important painters of surrealist art was Salvador Dali. And if you live in Florida, you can go down to, I think it's in St. Petersburg somewhere, you can see all of Dali's stuff. He's got a big Dali museum down there, and not Dollywood, Dali, the other Dali. One of his most famous paintings is called The Persistence of Memory, and it's the painting that most people think of when they think of Dali. It's got the clocks that are sort of melting over things, and it's all about how it's sort of a death thing, everything sort of dies in the end. So we have these clocks that are melting and time has passed, and we've got some like this little herd of ants over here devouring something to show that, as we used to sing in elementary school, the ants go in, the ants go out. They eat up things. So the ants are sort of the cleanup crew for all of that. So surrealism, very odd paintings. Rene Magritte's another famous painter in that period. His paintings tend to have things sort of juxtaposed in odd ways. Like there's a famous one with a lot of trees, and there's a person coming through the trees, but it's like part of his body is here and part of his body is over there, and it's all just sort of weird. Another big ism from the period is abstract expressionism. Expressionism we've talked about already, so now we're just moving into a different form of that. And one of the primary painters of that is Jackson Pollock, who is an American, and we're looking at his painting called Number 8. So it's not telling us very much. Obviously, this is not a painting of the number 8. It's just number 8 of something. And what Jackson Pollock would do was, instead of painting, standing up on an easel like you would think of a painter painting, he would just lay the canvas on the floor, and he would just take paint and throw it or spill it and drizzle it, and then he would take sticks or paddles or something other than a paintbrush and move it around. So you think that's art? Well, it is. That's abstract expressionist art. So it's not really giving us A picture, it's just sort of art for the sake of the colors and the shapes that might come out of it. Then we have lots of others. We have Post-Impressionist Art, so we have reacted against the Impressionism that we saw earlier. We have the Fauvists, who were very much into using kind of weird colors, so people would be purple and their clothes would be, magenta or some weird things. The sky might be yellow, using colors in odd kinds of ways. We have primitivism, where they tried to make paintings that look like people painted them who didn't know how to paint. So the perspectives would be all funny. A lot of times it'll have a sort of a crayon outline, like you drew your outline and then you painted in the middle of it. So lots and lots of isms. It's just not possible to talk about all the different kind of art movements that happen in the modern period. But there are a couple of things we should talk about that are really new kinds of ideas in art. One of those is just the idea of abstract art. I mean, we've seen this Jackson Pollock that doesn't really have a picture of anything. That's a very modern kind of construct. Everything we've looked at up to this point, you could at least recognize it as being something. It's a person, it's a place, it's something you could make some sense out of, even in early 20th century art where they're kind of getting on the edge of things. But now we just have paintings that they're just paintings to be about the shape and about the color. So you might just have a painting that's a canvas that's just yellow, just a canvas of yellow. And that's the painting. It means something to the artist, should mean something to you. I saw a painting recently at the Hirshhorn Museum. So that I'm walking down a wall and I'm thinking there's just a stripe on the wall that they've just decorated. But it's not. It's somebody's artwork. There's a tag there that tells me who painted that and what it is. And it basically, to me, it looked like, a blue stripe down the wall. I thought it was decoration. So art goes lots of different kinds of ways now. Photography is a new art form in the 20th century. It's not a new medium in the 20th century because it goes back into the 1800s. We had photography from the Civil War time. But taking photography as an art medium is a really 20th century idea. So we have people using a new medium. We've gotten away from our paintbrushes and our oils and watercolors and whatever. We're just using a different thing to paint with. We're using a photography now. So black and white, moving to color. We've gone from big old plates that you had to stick in the side of your camera to digital cameras that you can fit in your pocket that will do just incredible quality. So the whole idea of photography as art is a 20th century idea. And probably the most recent of the artistic kinds of elements we see is computer-generated graphics. You can take your computer now. You don't have to have any skill with a paintbrush or tools, or you don't have to stretch canvas over things anymore. You can do it all sitting at your desk with your computer. You don't like the color, you change the color. You have so much flexibility. And we'll see those same kinds of flexibility showing up in music as we take a look at how music has dealt with all these same kinds of changes that we have seen in history, technology, and in visual art.